Hello, and welcome to Season 3 of Enchanting Economics in New Mexico. This podcast is a production of Bieber, the recognized expert in socioeconomic data for the state of New Mexico. Your hosts, as usual, are me, Rayanne McKernan, alongside Sarun Lytle. Joining us today is Adrienne Sandoval, the Director of the Oil Conservation Division at the New Mexico Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department. Adrienne, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So, as the director of OCCD at EMNRD, I hope you're okay with me using those acronyms. Let's talk about the oil industry, because a lot of research that Bieber does relates to the oil industry. And one of our researchers who's joining us today, Julian Baca, he just finished a preliminary analysis for your department. So I'm thinking, just to start, can you give us a little context or background on the industry in the state, in terms of history or economic or fiscal, and maybe talk a little bit about the major changes in the industry for New Mexico over the last several years, especially with regard to the state becoming one of our country's largest oil producers?
Yeah, absolutely. So New Mexico has a long history of oil and gas production within the state, going back really over 100 years at this point. The Oil and Gas Act, which is what the Oil Conservation Division, the statute that we operate under, was written in 1935. And we have been regulating the oil and gas industry within the state ever since. Our role is to prevent waste, protect correlative rights, and protect human health and the environment. And we manage the oil and gas industry really from cradle to grave. We permit new activity. We manage it during its lifetime, and then manage the closeout of it. So reclaiming sites, plugging and abandoning appropriately. The oil and gas industry is primarily focused in two parts of the state, the Northwest and the Southeast part of the state. They're two very different basins. The Northwest is primarily a gas producing basin, whereas the Southeast is primarily an oil producing basin with large amounts of associated gas with it. Really in the past several years within the state, production has skyrocketed. We have increased, I believe it's to the number 2 oil producing state in the US. So just behind Texas. We previously were ranked 3rd behind North Dakota, but in the past couple years, we've increased production substantially and have surpassed North Dakota. And so at this point, the last couple months even, we've continued to reach record highs, hitting over 40 million barrels in October of 2020, and recovering, I think, quite significantly from some of the downward dips during COVID. The state now accounts for roughly 12.5% of all of U.S. oil production and a little over 6% of all natural gas production.
Wow, that's amazing. So your department is one of 7 divisions at present day EMNRD, and you already, kind of told us a little bit about OCD, but could you tell us how you differ from the other divisions within EMNRD, and what do you feel your strengths are as a division, and what you bring to the state and the department in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So under the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department, there are 5 divisions. There's the Energy Conservation and Management, Mining and Minerals, there's State Parks, State Forestry, and then the Oil Conservation Division. All of these divisions are unique and all have the same goal of making our state a leader in protecting the environment and ensuring responsible land use while protecting New Mexico's natural, cultural, and recreational resources for posterity. And so we're unique in a lot of ways, but we're also very different. The Oil Conservation Division manages the oil and gas industry in the state. And while we have some places where we intersect with the other divisions, we are largely unique within the department.
And as far as being a leader, I feel like New Mexico is making huge strides to position itself as a leader. What lessons do you think can be learned looking to other states who are also innovating in oil and gas regulation and remediation? Or do you feel there's things that we could teach other states?
I think it goes both ways. We frequently work with and look to other states to see what they've done as we either have issues arise or we look to update rules. I think a couple of examples as of late. One is back in May, the methane waste rules went into effect. And in the process of developing those rules, the Oil Conservation Division looked at numerous other states to see how they managed waste in their unique states. And so, in some ways we pulled some ideas from each and every state, but we ended up making them unique to New Mexico. New Mexico, as I mentioned, is pretty unique in terms of we have very different basins on different sides of the state that operate very differently. And so we had to make sure that it worked for us. And we, particularly with that rule and with everything we do, we want to really be a leader. And I think with that rule, both the development of that rule was nationally leading. There was extensive stakeholder engagement up front, and really 2 years of collaboration to build that rule. And then, we believe that we built leading rules that provide flexibility for operators, but provide enough sidewalls to make sure that they operate within the scope of the rule and the intent of the rule, which is to reduce natural gas waste, is met. So that's, I think, one great example. The other thing that we've released recently was a seismic response plan to manage seismicity in the state due to oil and gas operations. I think we had the luxury in that scenario of not being the first state to have these types of issues. And we were able to look to states like Oklahoma, Texas, and even Canada up in Alberta to see the way that they've managed things and take some of those ideas and again, then make them unique and make sure that they fit here in New Mexico.
How does the work that OCD does intersect with the Energy Transition Act and other renewable energy goals, such as the Governor's 30/30 initiative?
Yeah, so while the ETA only applies to the electricity sector, what we're seeing is that more and more companies are incorporating renewable energy into their operations. We have some companies who have started to incorporate solar panels and those types of energy sources to power their operation and move away from gas-fired engines. Stakeholders and the public really want the oil and gas industry to operate in a more environmentally responsible way, and that can be achieved in a number of ways, and adding renewables throughout the process is one way to do it. The OCD also works closely with the other divisions within EMNRD, and for 30 by 30, that in one way that we demonstrated that was working with the Forestry Division. We worked closely with them on a rare plant rule, and 30 by 30 is another opportunity to ensure that we look to conserve land and make sure that we're finding the right balance between production and conservation.
And according to the preliminary analysis that Bieber and Julian conducted, you guys are really understaffed. Is this because of COVID, or is there more to it? And have the staffing levels been able to keep pace with the rapid increase in drilling and production over the last few years?
So crude oil production has really more than doubled from 2014 to 2020. Unfortunately, at the same time, the growth within the Oil Conservation Division's budget has been pretty muted. We have only expanded at an annual rate of about 4% each year during that same time period. We've done a lot over the past couple years to make sure that we're doing everything possible to gain efficiencies in all of the things that we do. But at the end of the day, we need additional staff to perform the large volume of work that comes with managing this large industry in New Mexico. Over the past couple years, we've really cut our vacancy rates. When I started in this role almost 3 years ago, we had a vacancy rate of over 50%. That's been cut to about 20%, which is a great start. And we're getting really creative with recruitment and trying to find the best ways in order to fill those positions. That's been everything from opening an Albuquerque office to help retain staff that we're driving back and forth from maybe Santa Fe and pulling from a larger talent pool there in Albuquerque. And so we've really tried to find some good ways to retain the staff that we have, draw more staff. And, the governor's executive budget, I think, really reflects the need that we have in the OCD and proposed to add an additional 25 FTEs to the Oil Conservation Division staff.
Yeah. And are there challenges that you're facing due to the staff shortages?
Unfortunately, yes. Due to staffing shortages, and I think what was highlighted in this report was there are large backlogs in workloads on both the engineering and the environmental kind of sides of the OCD house. Due to that, we're holding up both development and the cleanup of sites that need to be remediated. We also need, staff on the compliance and enforcement side, the technical side, the legal assistance to help us manage enforcement cases, administrative staff. We really are looking at shortages across the Oil Conservation Division. And, as I mentioned, I think a second ago, the governor's budget really, I think, reflects this need in the budget proposal for us.
Yeah. And the report also estimated that if you had the funding to hire additional staff, additional activities could be instrumental in helping to inject millions of dollars into our economy. Could you take us through how that might happen? And were these results in the report surprising to you?
Yeah, so I think the report looked at two specific things. This was a preliminary report, and what we're going to do over the coming, 4 to 6 months is do an expanded kind of final report to dig into things a little bit deeper. But for this preliminary report, we really focused on two pieces, the engineering side and what we call authorizations to transport, which really in practical speak means allowing production after the well has come online. So giving producers the authority to start producing that oil or gas. And then we looked at the environmental side of the house and the remediation. And so the Oil Conservation Division, we manage all the remediation and cleanup of releases in the oil field. And that can be things from oil, condensate, produced water, some sort of unauthorized release. And there's a lot of work that's associated with that. So on the remediation side, practically what that means, so when there's a spill in the oil field, operators will report that spill to the OCD. And what we do is we need to review that plan initially to make sure that, one, the site has been properly delineated, which really just means has been looked at, made sure that the spill is characterized. We know how deep it goes, we know how far it goes, we know what is in the spill, so we know how to clean it up. And so it's been properly characterized. And then based on that characterization, the operator has proposed an adequate methodology to clean it up to meet the standards within the rule. So OCD staff reviews that and either approves it, denies it, or may propose some changes to it. So after that's done, an operator will go and then, start to perform the site cleanup. Depending on how complicated the site cleanup is, there might be an interim report required as well, which also requires OCD review. And I think it's important to know that operators cannot start on that remediation until the OCD has approved these plans. And so they're waiting on us to approve the remediation plans before they can start. So then, they're working on cleaning up the site, and then they need to close out the site. So once all the remediation has been done, they're going to submit another report to the OCD that, again, kind of delineates the site and proves that it has been properly cleaned up to all of the standards in the rule. That also requires another OCD review, and the site cannot be closed out until we've performed that review. All of that work the environmental cleanup piece of it is typically done with local contractors. Companies will hire environmental contractors to come in and perform these site delineations, do the environmental cleanup, and a lot of times also do the reports that go to OCD. So they're contracting directly with these companies, which is injecting money into local economies, and creating high-paying jobs for these environmental companies and the people they employ. It's even everything from, for example, work at labs, because as part of the delineation, they have to send in laboratory analysis, which help drive, the economy for them as well. So it really touches on a lot of different places. And so when OCD has a backlog of these sites and can't get them reviewed, we're essentially holding up both the cleanup and also that economic development in the state.
And not only, is this having a direct impact on our economy, can you talk about the importance of the fiscal contribution that oil and gas makes to tax revenues?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as I mentioned earlier, right now, New Mexico is the #2 onshore oil producer behind Texas. We produced 40 million barrels in October of this year. That's a lot of oil and gas in our state, which generates revenues in taxes and royalties. In FY21 and for FY, basically, the fiscal year runs from July through June. So oil and gas operations in FY21 accounted for 30% of the state's recurring revenues. That's a substantial piece. And that number is nearly $3 billion by some estimates, and as high as 35% of all recurring revenues, depending on the year and basically the methodologies used, with over $1 billion of that going towards education spending. So oil and gas is a large contributor to the New Mexico economy.
Yeah. Wow. That's way more than I realized.
Yeah. And so it's important for the oil conservation to be, appropriately staffed to manage an industry that's that large, so we can ensure that they're operating responsibly.
Right. And we've covered a lot of ground in this interview, but Bieber's preliminary analysis was, just that, a preliminary analysis. Julian is continuing to work and it provides you a more in-depth final report. What are you hoping will come out of that when it hits your desk later this summer?
I think what we were aiming to do with this report, first off, was just really understand the economic impact that the Oil Conservation Division has on the state, and how additional staffing in the Oil Conservation Division could actually drive additional economic development in the state. So really, kind of looking at a spend a little money to make a lot more money scenario. With the broader report, I think the goal is really to refine the numbers, do some additional research, and ensure that everything's as accurate as possible. What we'd like to have for this report is to determine our budget asks for the next fiscal year and to make sure that we have the best information to go off of.
And is there anything else that you would like us to know about OCD or the work that you're doing?
In the past couple years, I think there have been a lot of changes at the OCD. I think really positive changes as we've tried to modernize the division. There was a pretty big modernization effort, everything from the way that we're structured to try to keep up with a very technologically savvy industry, as well as we have made huge strides in our IT systems and how operators report to us both applications and forms. Previously, when I started this role almost 3 years ago, we were collecting everything by paper, and that is an enormous volume of paper that took staff time to scan into systems. And so we've created enormous efficiencies, I think, at this point, through both the structure update as well as the IT changes and modernization efforts that we've done. we wanted to make sure that we are gaining every ounce of efficiency out of the staffing that we do have. And that's really what's driven the executive budget request. We've gained a lot of efficiencies. We've seen where we can get to and what we can do. But that helps us drive and understand what we still need. And that executive budget of additional 25 FTEs really demonstrates where the need still remains.
And so where does that request stand today?
The session is still live. It ends next week, I believe, on Thursday. The executive budget recommended 25 FTEs, and FTEs meaning full-time equivalents, so essentially one person, so 25 additional people. The legislative budget proposed basically 6 FTEs with funding for around 5 to 5.5. Some of our positions are very technical, so they're some of the higher paid positions. And so the funding that was provided would only fund, I think, a portion of those FTEs. And so there's a pretty big difference right now between the legislative budget and the executive budget. And we are hoping to close that gap in the next week before the session ends and before budgets are finalized.
Tarun, Julian, is there anything you guys would like to ask?
No, I think you guys covered all the high points. I think Adrienne did a good job talking about the increase in oil production and also the importance of the just fiscal impact. 30% of recurring revenues coming from the oil and gas industry. GSP, the oil and gas industry, accounts for about 21% of the total economy. There's over 25,000 jobs that the oil and gas industry that mining contributes. So it's an important part of the economy, both from an economic as well as a fiscal perspective. And, the growth, and you read the headlines in the newspaper about, record revenues for the state budget. And that's really due to not just spot prices for crude oil, but also just the doubling in production that the state has seen, which Adrienne highlighted. So, I think it's not a big mystery. It's not a huge surprise. Oil and gas is really important for state budgets and local budgets, and OCD plays an important role in all that.
Yeah, and I should point out that if anyone listening has not read the report or seen the report that Julian did, it is available on our website, bbird.unm.edu, under publications.
I think maybe one additional thing to add that the report really highlighted the large piece that the environmental cleanup aspect plays, and how large of an economic driver that is within the state. I think, traditionally it's easy to see where Oil Conservation Division, helps to maybe facilitate economic development through oil and gas production. But this is, I think, a less seen side of the things that the Oil Conservation Division does. And these environmental remediations and cleanups, are incredibly important, both from an environmental and public health aspect, but also there's still a large economic driver within the state. And I think, that can be overlooked sometimes, but is really still very important.
Definitely.
So just real quick, I would just add that these jobs are good jobs. They're high-paid jobs. They're some of the highest-paid jobs when you control for education levels. And you look at the oil and gas producing parts of the state. You look at Lee County, Eddy County. Those are the two counties that are experiencing the greatest growth in terms of population, but also economic growth. Whereas the state's been growing by about 1% per year over the last 10 years. Lee County's been growing by 7 to 8% per year, for example. And so the remediation and reclamation jobs are also, related industries, and those are also good jobs and, pay pretty well as well. So I would just highlight that.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about, during COVID, we were tracking some of the economic indicators, and oil prices was one of them. And once when that hit negative number, and it broke my chart because I did not anticipate negative axis on the price. So I just wanted to ask somebody working on the oil and gas industry to say, what did it happen then?
The oil price fluctuation is really typically due to world pieces at play. While it impacts New Mexico, it's not something that is controlled or managed here. And so that was really, I think, a snapshot of what was going on with the world and politics at the time. It definitely, we did see an impact here in the state. There was substantially less new production that was coming online. There was less new drilling. The rig counts dropped. But overall, actually, New Mexico had less, I think, percentage-wise drop in rig count and production than a lot of our kind of peer states. I think part of that is due to it is less expensive sometimes to operate in the Permian Basin here in New Mexico, and you get more returns for your investment. So while we did have a downturn here, absolutely, if you looked at percentage-wise how much we lost, it was less as compared to other states.
All right. Well, that about wraps it up for us here at Enchanting Economics in New Mexico. Don't forget to check us out at Bieber, that's bber.unm.edu, or on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn under @UNMBieber. Adrienne, thank you again for joining us. And until next time, take care, everyone.
Thank you.